Mobius pick here. Today we'll be talking a little bit
about Magic Finance.
Yeah. What's going on with that? So the Pro Tour just happened, and I was right! I anticipated that there would be extremely aggressive Eldrazi decks, hinging on the cost of effectiveness of Eye of Ugin, right? You get more mana playing 2/3 drops, right? Like two, I don't know, what are they called? The flying guys? The 2 mana and a blue for a 2/1 flying that makes one. Like, if you play 2 of those on a turn, you get more mana than if you turned your 10 mana spell to an 8 mana spell.
Yeah, I mean,
4 mana.
you can show them the deck.
Yeah, the blue-red deck. That's a good point. We can look at some of the really cool modern decks that popped up over the Pro Tour. If they haven't went up.
You might just go to Pro Tour deck lists.
Do they have that listed somewhere?
I'm sure they do.
Oh, you mean just looking it up? Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can look at Pro Tour deck lists. Pro Tour Atlanta 2016.
I didn't realize it was in Atlanta.
Yep. Let's do deck lists. Deck lists. Yeah, it was right down the road. You could have gone.
Well, had I, qualified.
Yeah, you're not quite Pro Tour level yet. Sorry, Brad. Nope, that's not what I wanted.
Oh, go back.
Alright, Brad will take over on that. I'll talk for a minute.
No, he won't. I think you want the top one.
The top one. The top one.
Alright. Now, if you go to...
Deck lists.
Top 8 list. There you go.
Okay, so when we talk about the deck list, the main words, essentially 6 Eldrazi-based decks and 2 Affinity decks. The Team Channel Fireball had the colorless lists, which we'll look here. And basically they're using the power of Eye of Ugin, just like this one Eldrazi Temple, to play things like Eldrazi Mimic and have it copy other big Eldrazi. Endless One can be variable size. It's very powerful. Now's a great time to move those cards. It's higher than it probably ever will be, which is what we're going to say for a lot of these Eldrazi cards. And the reason is you're never going to see a Pro Tour where there's 6 Eldrazi decks again. That's almost impossible. So all these cards you see here are great cards to move, including Simeon's Spirit Guide, because it's seeing more use now than it will probably ever again.
It's a common. It's probably worth $10 to $20. I mean, that's impressive.
Yeah, all of these cards are great cards to move if you have them. And the reason is, at some point they're going to print the 3rd Eldrazi set, at least one more. And when they print that Eldrazi set, they are going to have to ban Eye of Ugin. And you might say, well, what about the Temple? What about these other options? And the reason is, they're going to want to be able to play and make cards that are fun and flavorful and powerful as Eldrazi's. And they can't print more of those. It makes this deck too good. This is arguably either the best deck or tied with Affinity. It's definitely a tier 1 deck, and there's no reason to push it into the comfortably best deck. Imagine if they released another set of Oath of the Gatewatch. It would be ridiculous if they didn't ban something for Modern.
Yeah, so they may not ban it immediately. They'll probably wait till a few more sets come out.
Right. They probably won't ban it till right before they print the new set. So let's say in a year that
yeah,
Rise...
that'll be 3 sets from now or something.
Yeah, it'll actually probably be 2 years. So let's say in 2 years, it's the Modern Pro Tour, and they're going to print, Rise of Americal. Well, let's name it that, whatever. We know there's going to be Eldrazi spells. They can't have Eye of Ugin unless they're all colored Eldrazi spells with no colorless activations, and that just seems really poor, right? Like, if they were pure colored Eldrazi spells, they could, because these both affect colorless cards.
Eye of Ugin was one of the, whatchamacallits.
Yeah, it was one of the expeditions. But with the exception of them printing colored Eldrazi spells in the last one, they become too powerful with these cards, and that's too great of a risk for me to take as a finance or speculator person to assume that they're not going to make colorless Eldrazi cards because it's their thing.
Alright, right? So talk about Chalice of the Void for a second.
Yeah, Chalice of the Void was really good here. I actually anticipated this deck overall with the exception of Simeon Spirit Guide, Chalice of the Void, and Ratchet Bomb. I thought the deck would include all these colorless cards, some amount of removal. I assumed it was going to involve, like, Dismember and maybe a couple of black discard spells to play with the black mana cards. That's not the way this deck list went. One of the other ones did. They went with pure colorless and Simeon Spirit Guide to get out cards faster. A turn 1 Chalice of the Void on 1 locks out most of Modern.
Does that?
And with it being able to lock out on 0, like Affinity, imagine if somebody knew game 2 you're playing Affinity and they went turn 1, Chalice of the Void on 0. Like you won game 1 and they put it on 0. How do you feel about your affinity matchup if you can't play
That's-
zero cost spells?
It's pretty terrible.
Right. See, and in game 1, you can play Chalice of the Void on 1 blind, and that stops most modern decks. Full stop. Blue decks don't do much.
At least slows them down a significant amount.
Yes. So that's a really, really strong card to put with a lot of powerful effects. An effect that Simian Spirit Guide plays so well, and that you can play, in theory, a turn 1 Thought Knot Seer if you want. Probably not going to, but you can play your turn 2 Reality Smasher after you played one or more Mimics, and that is an extremely potent play. Another part with that goes that there's a turn 2 kill, right? 3 Eldrazi Mimics and a Reality Smasher swing for 20 with haste and trample on turn 2, which is terrifying. But the other thing about this deck is it has many sort of combinations that are terrifying on turn 2. Like we talked about the Eldrazi Mimic, that's really strong turn 1, turn 2 play. But so is just playing a turn 2 Thought Knot Seer. Like, that's really oppressive. So is playing 2 Thought Knot Seers on turn 2, right? So you played your Temple, then you played your Eye of Ugin, and the next turn you used 2 Simian Spirit Guides to put down 2 4/4s and take the 2 best cards out of their hand.
Yeah.
Most decks can't beat that. There's a large amount of very strong turn 1, 2, and 3 plays in this deck that make the explosiveness oppressive. Because it's not an explosive amount of 1/1s. A lot of times you see go-wide strategies where, you know, the Affinity deck will have how many 1/1s and 2/2s and maybe one big creature? But this deck is like, hey, look at my 3 4/4s.
Yep.
And that's very strong.
Even if they play them over the course of several turns, they're still much bigger.
Yeah. We actually saw one of the Affinity decks in the board playing Thought Knot Seer, trying it out. I don't think that's a particularly great spot for it, but that's interesting as well.
Yep.
And
So
we
what
saw
was
the...
Louis Vargas on?
He was on the same one. The whole CFB team was on this colorless one.
Every card the
They
same.
had like a
basically.
75 or 80% win rate with the deck for the Pro Tour. Right? These aren't just
Awesome.
bad players. These are the best players in the world playing against each other, and this deck made that much of a difference. The average pro player has something... The world's best pro players have like a 60% win rate. This deck was insane.
Yeah, I bet a lot of people will be sleeving this deck up.
Yeah, and I think it's a good idea. I think that this deck will be around for a year or two. I would not buy this deck assuming it's going to be around forever. It won't be around forever, but it will be around for a while. So if you're going to play for a while and you're fine later selling these cards off, or not being able to play this deck for the rest of your career, that's fine. Like, they'll never ban Jund. They'll never ban Abzan. Those are basically
And they're
not
probably
bannable
not going
decks.
to ban any cards in them, for that matter.
No, you know, they said when they banned Bloodbraid Elf, the deck was dead. The deck wasn't dead. The deck was different. If they banned...
Lots of people didn't play it for a while, that's for sure.
Yeah, which is definitely not the right choice. And there's no reason that if they ban Eye of Ugin, the other Eldrazi cards that they print might make the deck good enough, but it won't be this good. This good might be too good. Just like pod decks were too good, but the Collected Company decks are fine. Like, they're strong, good decks to play.
Alright, let's look at the affinity list that actually made it.
Well, first we get to the blue-red deck, and this is actually the deck that beats the colorless Eldrazi deck, because it uses the same thing, the same Eye of Ugin, Temple, all that kind of stuff, but it plays out a bunch of smaller creatures. It takes more advantage of the Eye of Ugins by being able to play these essentially one-mana powerful cards to get more strength out of the Eye of Ugin. They also have Gemstone Caverns, which is a cool little thing, because they can get rid of an extra Temple or something, because they have all these extra lands. And it puts you a mana ahead, which makes a big difference. So they're essentially running a different version of Simian Spirit Guide. But this deck goes wide enough with strong creatures and evasive creatures that it's hard for the Eldrazi deck to beat. It's worse against things like Pyroclasm. You can Pyroclasm this deck and it kills a significant amount of the deck.
Yep, just kill a lot.
But Ruination Guide's a terrifying card. I saw many games where this came down and it had essentially like anywhere between 4 to 9 power. That's scary. Alright, we see another version of the same blue-red deck, which did great. Alright, and then we have the Affinity. I think these Affinity lists are very close to each other.
Well, so they're playing Master of Ethereum as a 4 of. That's pretty uncommon.
So they knew they were going to be playing more aggressive decks, that Jund decks would be on the downswing. And if you're not playing against Jund, you'd rather have a bigger pump effect than a more resilient effect.
Yep.
Master of Ethereum is also one of the reasons I think this deck did very well against the other very large colorless decks. Sometimes your guy can be bigger than a 4/4 or a 5/5.
Yeah, sometimes he's unstoppable.
The sad part is...
I noticed that they're playing that Champions in the sideboard. That's actually how I prefer to play the deck.
Yeah, and that's just because they don't know when they're going to need more resilience in their deck. But right now, they thought they would need more power over resilience, and that was the right choice. It's super sad and like scary that an Endless one can be bigger than probably the biggest Master of Ethereum you can think of, because it's come down as a 12/12. And I don't know, have you ever had a Master of Ethereum that's a 12/12?
Yeah, I have.
Okay.
Usually it's, whatever its toughness is, double its power because it's got a plating on it.
Yeah.
Or you've got the plating on a flyer.
And we see a different version of Affinity here. Instead of running the thought casts, they're running the stubborn denials, which, they were expecting to be a little bit more disruptive, which I like as well. But you
I
can
like
see
that it's two different versions of Affinity.
They're
They're both playing the Ethereums, though.
Yep, neither is running. They both were spot on that it was all beginning about the aggro. And then there was Frank Laporte's list, who didn't test with the team. This is his first Pro Tour. Did really well. He's playing essentially a Sultai version. It's closer to the blue-red version. It's playing one World Breaker, which is great for the sort of mirrors, and a little bit slower version. And makes great use of the Relic of Progenitus and Scrabbling Calls in being able to repeatedly, as we saw in some matches, use Blight Herder, which is pretty cool. And this is actually the evolution we saw from the old white-black lists that you did all the processing stuff.
Cool. What's the claws do? I've never even seen that.
It's basically a bad Scrabbling, or a bad Relic. And that's really cool. But one of the things you do notice in the color stack I want to point out is that their sideboard is very thin. This one has life gain in it and some just various answers, but you see them running gut shots, ratchet bombs. If you go up to the pure colorless version, they don't have many sideboard options. They have the Warping Whale, Pithing Needle, moving, but none of these cards have matches where they're super, super great. They're running the Fourth Spellskite, which is powerful, but I don't want to run gut shots, but they're just running them because they have to. Same for Ratchet Bomb, same for Relic. None of these cards are great, with the exception of Spellskite. But on to the big thing, which is cards to move. The first card that you should definitely be thinking about moving are cards that are going to be their highest point now, which are cards like Eye of Ugin. We can see this uptrend. Well, we'll look at the paper version, because you guys are more likely to have paper versions. It went from a $5 card, because it was played in EDH and Tron and all this kind of stuff, and it has spiked up to somewhere around a 40... Yeah. It spiked up to a $50, $45 card. It's going to continue on a downtrend. I would expect this to level out somewhere around between $40 and $30. If I had them, I would move them. If you have foils, I would move them. They'll drop back down. They will remain high. Don't expect this card to drop back down to $5. This will be a $20 card as long as it's legal and modern.
Might be more than that for a while.
And after it's banned, it'll dip below 5 for a minute and then pop back up.
Probably won't even get down to 5 again.
Yeah. Well, there'll be a lot of people looking to get rid of them if they get banned.
They'll never go back down to 5, though. Magic doesn't work that way.
Alright, and we've got Reality Smasher here. $9 is very high for a rare in the current set. I would move them now. Even if they see standard play, it's unlikely they'll see enough standard play to matter, and it's unlikely they'll be played any time in Modern except for now, this next year or two. Another great card to move on. If you have them for standard, I don't know if they'll drop enough to offset the cost of selling and rebuying. So let's say you know you're
actually going to play them in standard.
I think I would hold there. Same for Thought Not Seer. It's
that,
very good right now.
That card is... It's going to come down, but only because this set just got released.
Right. So now's a great time to start selling. You see they got up to $20 online, and in paper they got somewhere between like 15-ish. And now's the time to move them. They're going to go probably down to about 10. But it is the most powerful card, I think, in the new standard set.
As soon as they go down, you should pick them up because...
Mimics are another card you want to move. Might see some play in standard, anywhere from some to quite a bit, but the modern deck that exists with it is really the real draw to moving it right now. Another card you want to get rid of is Eldrazi Temples. They went from a $2 card to a $9 or $10 card. And there are products that have Eldrazi Temples, and if you're interested in picking them up, it can be a really good time to pick them up. The Eldrazi versus IndyCar deck has quite a few solid rares to pick up. You could just buy packs of Eldrazi versus IndyCar and sell them for more than you bought them. So that's a really good time.
You probably can't now.
They're in Walmart, so yes, you can.
Oh.
I actually picked one up the other day at Walmart before this, anticipating Temples to go up, and they did. Death Shadow is another one of those cards that spiked recently. The online paper has it at 4, but it's been as low as somewhere as 2. But let's look at the paper version where it went from a flat 4 up to 15, and it's back down to 9 or 10. This is an aggressive deck. I don't think that the Suicide Zoo variants are actually super consistent in how long you can play them. It's really meta dependent, so I really look to get rid of them pretty quickly as well. Now, this is the last card I want to talk about, and I wanted to point out, some cards have a baseline, and sometimes the baseline is very high. Something like Jace is a card that if you had, you wouldn't necessarily want to sell because it's not going to get any lower. Like, Jace can't get worse. It's actually at its worst. It's only legal in Legacy and Vintage. But if they ever unban it in Modern, which is extremely unlikely, it would just shoot up. I mean, the card would triple in price overnight.
Yeah.
So a big part with some of your cards is if you have cards that have a steady value, it's not necessarily worth selling them until they spike up. The reason I'm pointing out Jace is that I have Ugin before this held at $5 very consistently with Tron. And there's not a reason to sell a card like that, especially when you have thoughts that it might come out. As soon as they said that we had another Eldrazi set coming out, I personally made sure that I had my Eye of Ugins and Eldrazi Temples. I thought they'd be good cards to have. And they were so low, I didn't think they would go any lower, and they could only go up from when they went up. And they did. So that's kind of one of the big parts to simple finance and stuff like that, is picking up cards that have a low cost and can't get worse. One of my favorite speculations I made is at one point I had like 10 or 15 Dark Depths at the Cold Snap release because I saw that this card was very powerful, and if they ever made a card that got rid of the counters, it'd be great. And a big part of my collection came from selling all of my Dark Depths. I sold all of them at the same time when they spiked up when they printed the black 2/1 that you can sacrifice into the counters.
Vampire
Hexmage. And that's kind of another position right there. I'm not saying that you should buy expensive cards and speculate on them. The trick is buy cards that can't decrease in value. Jace is an expensive card, but it's a good example because it's been a flat price for a very long time.
Yeah, for some reason it went up and then slowly back down there.
Yeah. Alright, so that's all we want to talk about on that.
Alright, so we're going to restart the stream and do a draft real quick if Dan wants to.
Yep, we're going to throw up the draft. We'll see you guys in just a